Good day, everyone. I hope you're having an amazing day. So today we will be covering about the best practices to write an Apex trigger. In my last lecture, we talked about different kinds of triggers, how to do before insert, before delete, and we had a look at different methods that comes with the trigger, like is after and is delete, before, after kind of stuff, right? And then we talked about trigger new and trigger.old. That's great. And we have written a very basic delete trigger to stop us from deleting a record, right? And then we have created a before insert trigger as well. So today I wanted to talk about the best practices to write trigger, because most of the time I've seen a lot of code where the trigger is not very well written, so it can cause future problems. So okay, so first thing first, what we're going to do, we're going to log into our org as usual. You know that I'm using my free developer free developer org. And if you are using Sandbox, that's okay, but please do not use customer Sandbox orgs to try your trigger, right? Because that's not a good place to write it. So it's always better to create your own free org, and then you can do a lot of stuff with that because it's yours, right? You can muck around, you can do whatever you want. Okay, all right, so let's jump into developer console. So the way to go to developer console, as you already know, go to this gear cog icon, go to developer console, right? And we'll take you here. So we have a skeleton code. So we wrote this code last time, right? This code will stop you from deleting any record from this specific object portal here, right? So that's great. And we have written some, before insert queer trigger as well. So today we're going to talk about after insert. I just wanted to demonstrate the way to write a good trigger or a bad trigger, right? Okay, the first thing, this trigger.new, right? This can return up to 200 records, right? Let me give you a very simple example. You know about data import, right? I've talked about data import, or you can talk about data loader as well, right? Using which you can import a massive amount of data, right? So there's a difference between a data import and data loader. Please check out my video. So if you wanted to use anything over 50K, then you need to use, you can't use the data import, right? Okay. Let's say you're importing, say, 100 records, right? 100 porter beer record. So if you do something like this, let's say equals to, just a second, so you're new, okay, just say P1. Let's save it. Okay, doesn't save. Okay, right. So trigger.new, right? It returns the list of records, right? It can have one record, it can have multiple records, right? So what I'm trying to demonstrate here is that, can I assign this to an individual? You can't. See, illegal assignment from a list to porter beer. So it has to be a list, something like this, right? And let us wait till it's saved. Sometimes it takes, for whatever reason, it takes time. So it saves, right? So trigger.new or trigger.old, it expects you, the list of records, right? So it can have one, it can have, more than one, or it can 10, 100, right? So please do not assume, number one, that you will get only one record. That's not the case, right? If you're doing something for, doing just for one record, that can cause potential issues, right? Because you're assuming that you will be only getting one record here. No, it's not always the case. You can get 2, you can get 10, because someone can, like I said, they can import that stuff using data loader, right? Okay, so that's one thing you should avoid. You should always keep into consideration that you will be getting multiple record. Always start with that assumption. That will save you a lot of problem in the future, right? Okay, that's the first thing. And the second thing, avoid writing so-called query, right? So something like this. Just give you an example. So we have something called this porter beer has something called account, right? I think it's a company. Yeah, this is reference to an account. So let's say just give you a simple example. Select name from account where ID equals to Peter account, right? Right, just a classic example. Right, so this one works, that's fine. But you know what's gonna happen? Let's say it has 200, you're getting 150, right? It will hit the so-called limit because you're trying to query again and again and again and again in the loops, right? This is absolutely a bad practice. You should not be doing this. It's better to load into a map or a list or something here, and then use that list inside the loop if you wanted to use that. That's one of the ways you can do it, right? So please avoid writing so-called query in a loop. That is a very bad practice. If I see a code and that will not pass the code review, it's end of story, period, because it will cause potential problem. Maybe you are expecting, say, 2 records for now. That's fine. And you say, oh, yeah, my so-called query passes. I'm not getting any so-called limit error. Well, but that's a poorly written code. You have potentially, you might get potential issues in the future. Why to write a code, right, which cause potential issues, and then you have to spend time to debug? It's a waste of your time. It's a waste of company resource and money, right? So you have to think from a financial perspective. When a company invests time in you, they expect you to write a better code so that, code which can be maintained. Nobody wants to hire someone who writes a code and then, you're getting a lot of bugs. No, that's actually a very poor programming practice, right? Okay, so avoid writing so-called query and avoid doing DML operation. What I meant by that, let me give you a very simple example. Okay, close this one. I wanted to do, let's do something different today. So what happens, let me give you a very simple scenario which we're going to implement today. When I create a porter beer record, right, I want this information to be logged into a beer log object. So let's jump in here for a second. So we look at something called beer. So beer log, right? So what I want, so when a porter beer record gets generated, right? Something this. Let me show you here. Porter beers. I always get excited when I talk about beers because as you can already tell, right? I'm a big fan of beer. So all right, it's okay. So what we're gonna do? So when you do when you enter information here and when you save, right, some sort of information should get logged to here, to the log. Say this beer being sold for specific amount, right? Just a log, like an audit log, right? So we can do that after insert trigger. So once the record get inserted, it will create another record, right? Okay, so that's one thing you can do. And one more thing I just wanted to highlight, guys, it's better to have one trigger per object, or like if you wanted to do, rather than having, 50 triggers, because Salesforce can't generate the order of execution, which one will execute first, right? It's not a good practice, right? You can write in a complex trigger in a one code, right? Okay, so just keep that in mind because cascading triggers, that's one of the things you have to keep into consideration, because what happens is that you update a field or you do something, it will fire another trigger, so it can go into loops. So you have to pay very special attention because trigger writing is an art. That's how I look into it, right? It comes with experience, so you need to follow the best practices with Salesforce tells you to do, because there's a reason why they tells you to do, because they are the one who developed this concept, right? So they know what they're talking about. So please follow. So as I mentioned, avoid so-called query and avoid DML expression. Okay, so sorry I digress, but I just wanted to emphasize on this, right, before we proceed further. Okay, So we're gonna create this object inside this porter beer trigger. Once the porter beer record gets saved, it will trigger this, fire this trigger and create an associated entry into this beer log object. Okay, sounds straight, right? Okay, so let's take this boy here and let's go here BL. So okay, you can name whatever you want, but it's better to name, you know, genuine, or it's good to have a better naming convention, which makes sense. So that when you return back to the same code after 6 months, you know what's going on, right? So it's always put. Also, I emphasize on putting code comment, like this trigger will create be a log object record. So you know what's going on, right? It's always good to have a code comment and proper indentation at the same time. Okay, so B1 dot. So what we're gonna do? So we wanted to populate this field logs equals to this beer has been sold for a price of whatever. So what's the price? Let's look at the amount. Something called amounts. Total amount, right? Okay. And insert B1. Okay, there is a problem with this code, so I'll talk about that in a minute. Let's see if we can save it. All right. Okay. So I think that's the wrong object we got. Right. Okay. Sorry. Okay. So this saves. All right. Now let's dive into porter beer, and let's create one. Let's refresh this boy. Okay. So let's create a new, and let's say demo beer porter amount, let's say $7 amount, so United Oil quantity, say 6, 9, whatever. Okay, so we got this. So now let's go to beer log to see if there's an activity here. Okay, we got one entry that's been created. Right, this beer has been sold for a price of 63. That's exactly what we wanted, right? Fantastic. So, so it's doing what we want this trigger to do, right? So that's great. That's fantastic. Now you wonder, oh yeah, my code works amazing, yada yada, right? So let's leave the code this way. No, hang on there. This is not a good way to write a code because you are doing a DML operation inside a for loop, which is a very, very bad practice. Because, as I mentioned, similar to the so-called limit, right? There is a governing limit for a DML statement. I guess it's 150. We'll put a link to the documentation. So this is not a good way to do it. So let's say if you're getting 180 records, right? So you're doing 180 DML operation, and it's going to fail. So the way to do that is to create a list here. Let's say a list of porter beer, and p list equals to new, okay, and right, okay. So p list. Instead of doing this, what we can do, p list add, and let's add this boy here. So once you finish the for loop, you can do insert plist, right? Or you can do database.insert if you wanted to have a partial save or kind of things, right? Okay, so all right, there is a problem there. What? Sorry, my apologies. This is not a beer law porter beer. This is yeah, okay. Right. This should work, I presume. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm doing a bulk insert, right? So I'm not doing insert in a for loop. And instead I'm doing, okay, let's add this record, this object to a collection. And then once my for loop is over, you can do plist. Let's try test it out, okay? Just to see if it works. Just go to Porter here, and let's say I just wanted to do. We're gonna do one at a time, but you know, if it works for one, it obviously gonna work for multiple. So, let's say demo one, demo 2, 3, 4, 5. Porter amount, let's say $12. Company, you're gonna just do quantity. You're gonna just put $10. Mind you, this is a custom object, right? So I've created this custom object, the Porter beer. If you've been following along, so you know I've created a Porter beer in one of the lectures. So if not, if you haven't been following along, I would encourage you to please go and watch my previous lectures, right? Okay, so let's go and look at the beer logs, right? Let's see what happens. Hopefully it's generate. So there should be two, right? Which is fantastic. So I have to see which one is it. No, not this one. Probably this one. Okay, this is the one, right? So it has created a record. So this is an efficient way to do it, because what I've done was that I'm not doing a DML operation inside a for loop. Instead, I'm doing it outside using a collection, right? And this will save you hassles associated with the DML exceptions, right? And you will not be spending a lot of time to troubleshoot what's going on, right? So this is one of the good way to write a triggers. So also, it's better not to write a complex logic inside a trigger, just in case, you know, inside a trigger general. It's good to have a helper class to write that, because what happens is, if you're gonna write, say, very very classic example, I tell you. Let's say you wanted to push this Porter beer information to a third party using an API, right? Simple example, right? So after insert, you can push all the stuff there. So if you write your API HTTP code here, you know, all that big chunk of method here, then it will be very difficult for you to troubleshoot, first of all. And the second, you can't reuse it, right? So it's always better to have a new class and have a method inside, and you annotate that with a future call out equals to true, right? So it's always good not to write your business logic inside the trigger. It's not a good practice at all. It's good to have a helper class, you know, where you and you can use that helper class dot method, static method here. This way it's easy to write your test case. Mind you guys that whenever you write an Apex trigger, you have to write a test case. And once you write a test case, you need to see your code coverage. It usually shows here. See, we don't have a test case here, so you can't see code coverage. When you click on, it says all coverage something 75, then you can see the lines of code which has been executed. So it's very handy. You know, it makes your life easier. And also remember, guys, that 75% code coverage on Sandbox not necessarily means a 75% code coverage in production. If you are using underlying production data for your test case, right? You can use underlying production data, or you can create everything from scratch. So there are pitfalls to each of both the scenario. I will cover those when I will be talking about the test classes, right? So today is all about triggers. So I hope you understand what I'm trying to cover here. So it's very important to write a trigger in an efficient way. This will save you a lot of hassle in the future. It will, it will not lead to any sort of DML and SOCL errors, right? So yeah, I mean, that's pretty much what I wanted to cover today. So we covered about three things, three important things. First thing, never assume that you will be dealing with one record in a trigger. You can get more than one, right? And never write a SOCL statement inside a for loop, within a for loop. It's not or any loop. It's not a good practice. And also never write a DML statement inside a for loop, because it can lead to DML exception, right? So you need to figure out a different way, like I showed you how to use collections to overcome the problem, And also, it's not a good practice to write a business logic inside a trigger. It's good to have a helper class, right? And a good practice not to have multiple triggers for a same object. If you can avoid it, please avoid it, because you can't guarantee the order of execution, right? Okay. So that's all I wanted to cover, guys, today. I hope you find this session valuable, because I wanted to bring out the real life experience, because I've been working on triggers a lot, so I know what can go wrong based on experience. So I just wanted to put it out there. That's what I wanted to cover, guys. I hope you're having an amazing Sunday. Take care. Bye bye.